Investment Committee to order. Good morning. Good morning, Lamont.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. Good. Well, thank you.
Good. You all set?
I think we're set. So,
All right.
do you want to do roll call?
Yes. For the State Treasurer, Mr. Moore. For the Director of Finance, Mr. Ortega. Ms. Higa. Ms. Dillon.
Here.
Mr. Rosensteel.
Here.
For State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Mr. Zeiger.
Here.
Mr. Unterman.
Here.
And Controller E. Madam Chair, you have a quorum?
Thank you,
And I see
Lamont.
Mr. Keeley, so note him.
Yes, he's present. So we'll start off an open session with the item 1 agenda for our investment committee meeting. I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Excellent. Okay, we're going to move into closed session. And call the investment committee open session to order. Lamont, I think we're going to start with approving the minutes, correct? Item 9. I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes from February meeting.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Great. Our minutes are approved. Thank you, Lamont. Do we have to do roll call in open session? Okay, we're good. All right, so we're going to jump to item 11, initiating our policy around divestment with thermal coal. So, Chris.
Thank you, Sharon. Chair, we're correcting the language to say that we are initiating this. You have already enacted your divestment policy. You're just initiating it as it relates to a specific factor being thermal coal. I direct your attention to INV 75. That is an excerpt from your 21 risk factor policy, specifically on environmental exposure. If you choose to initiate the policy, staff would begin to do more research on the exposure, the risk, the opportunity. We would meet with companies that would fall under our definition. And try to see if we can't get them to mitigate and also learn. You know, I've done a quick check. I do not have any chemical engineering majors on staff. Not surprisingly, Margot.
So she
I apologize.
begs to differ.
But we are primarily a bunch of business people, so we need to learn more about this. We would engage. Obviously, you're aware. Senate Bill 185, for the audience, the board took no position yesterday. That bill would move through. It has a timeline, assuming it's signed by the governor, which we think it would be, and probably adopted by the legislature. It would start January 1 of 2016. Under the bill right now, you're required to report back by July of 17. We understand that time frame may get crunched. The legislator has mentioned he wants to revisit that, Senator De Leon, so that may get moved up from 18 months to shorter. If you initiated your policy today, obviously we'd be about 9 months ahead of the Senate bill, and you would be making a decision about the risk of these investments earlier, so you'd be ahead of the time scale. PCA has recommended that you initiate the policy. I did not ask Makita. Normally under your new structure, PCA is the general consultant. Makita only comments if they have a contrary point of view or something else to add. I just want you to know I did not, at the staff level, give you a recommendation. I've been involved in 5 divestments to this point for our fund. All 5 of them we've lost money, and all 5 of them have not brought about social change. So from a philosophical standpoint, I don't think we should, and it says in our policy that divestment is not a preferred choice. We think engagement, ownership, active management is a better way to do it. But that said, staff is prepared. We gave you some additional research and reading just so you're aware, as well as your divestment policy. The standard is fairly high. Our exposure in this area is almost exclusively in the index portfolios. Our active managers have tended not to own these companies. One was owned, but that active manager was terminated due to other reasons. And so that company was liquidated out of our portfolio. So we would engage with these companies and work with the corporate governance staff and probably make a limited visit, not to the non-U.S. ones. Coal is certainly still used across the USA. It was 60% of the power. It's now 50%, dropping to 40% of the power generation. So we would visit the U.S. companies. It is the primary fuel source in China and India, which is our larger exposure, is the non-U.S. portfolio. I think we would engage those through the phone and through the mail to understand them better. But those are less likely to be worthwhile to spend the money to fly all the way around the world for those trips. So with that, I'm here to answer any questions. One last point, I guess, the divestment policy has 3 critical steps. The first is for you to initiate it. Second is for staff to do our due diligence. And it's important. We're looking at trying to understand the issue better, see what the companies are doing to mitigate that issue. As your policy says, if they're not doing anything to mitigate it, then we're trying to analyze the risk to the portfolio of owning those companies and the implications to the portfolio. Now that you have a new fiduciary council, obviously we'll need to work closely with Mr. Lederman to understand their legal standard better, because it might be different in the past. The final stage is we'd be coming back to you with a very thick packet, and I apologize in advance, but it's helpful for you to have a very thick packet of risk, return opportunities, pros and cons, for you then to be able to make an investment decision about whether to basically exclude these, put these on a restricted list. Right now we have about 800 securities that are restricted for our managers to buy. That represents a fewer number of companies because they cover debt and equity investments. With that, open to questions or comments by the consultants.
I'll make a comment, and then if our consultants want to chime in, I just wanted to kind of reiterate that this is initiating a policy of our board. And, you know, I think many of you have seen that the challenges we have as fiduciaries to kind of wrestle with some of these challenging issues. And I think I speak for the board. We take our fiduciary role very seriously, but also recognize an exposure to other funds around the globe, this question of how to engage in companies and be able to kind of catalyze change is challenging, and there's lots of different takes on that. And so we really want to be thoughtful and considerate as we look at this, because our first role really is to be a fiduciary of the system and to make sure that we have money in this fund for teachers ad infinitum. So with that, are there any questions from other board members? I don't see any questions. Alan, Stephen, do you have any thoughts, questions, input? Okay. So, okay. Betty.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I just wanted to have Chris reiterate kind of the process, because I think once the decision's made here, I just don't want there to be any misunderstanding about what that decision means. And
Yes.
so could you just go through the steps again? So I think that's important.
You bet. Thank you. And there's confusion about that because some divestment processes have gone very quickly. Some have gone very slowly. But if on INV 77 is your divestment policy, I would encourage the public and everybody to look at paragraph 3. That STRS has said by policy, we firmly believe that sort of divestment's the last option. Our best option is to try and engage and to affect change. So you're identifying a risk on your 21 risk factors, because this is not about social. We're not the State Department, and we're not an environmentalist. We're investments. So our job is to engage these companies on the risk that we see to our portfolio and to them. But also to research it, to learn more and understand it better. We now know about vitreous and metallurgical coal and the different uses for coal and where it's a positive, where it certainly is a pollutant. Understand the trends and what companies are doing about it. The engagement process sometimes takes a while because it takes time to set up meetings and for us to clear our schedule. There are examples where the engagement process was very fast, and the example I'll use was the last divestment, firearms. The companies initially said they'd be happy to meet with us, and then their lawyers no offense, got involved, and we got letters that said, no, we won't meet with you as shareholders, we won't even talk to you. So there was absolutely no point of engagement because we couldn't do anything. So that was 45 days at most, and boom. Many of these companies have said they're willing to meet with us. They want to talk to us. They want to understand. They don't understand what Stanford did because Stanford just did it. And I think we found talking to the companies, at least knowing what's coming, is very helpful. And the executives at times change their minds. So that would be the engagement, research, analysis. Then we would come back to you at a future date with identifying the companies that are and identifying the level of risk. You would then make a determination in public session of what companies you wanted to divest and put on our restricted list. We would not disclose how quickly or slowly we would sell those companies because we would be impacting the market. Your instruction to us is, as reasonably practical thereafter, eliminate these companies from our portfolio, and we'd go about it in a prudent manner.
Okay. Thank you. No, I think that's important, and I think, and so really our decision today is whether to direct the staff to undergo that evaluation.
To initiate.
Yeah.
To initiate this process.
Pursuant to our risk factors and the divestment policy.
That's right.
If I could, just to make sure you follow along with that is similar language that's in the bill as well.
Yes.
It starts with an identification, research, engagement process. Right, as I said, right now theirs allows for 18 months.
Right.
That may be shortened when it finally gets adopted, but.
Thank you. Any other comments from, before we go to the staff recommendation, I would like to hear from the public. So we have, I believe 5 people that have submitted requests to speak. So with the board's indulgence, I'd like to just go to them and then we can make a decision at board. So I'd love to call forth, I guess, if you guys want to start lining up at the microphones, I'd call it Sunny Galbraith from Twin Hills Teachers Association and Santa Rosa Teacher Association. The mic right behind you. Good morning, Ms. Galbraith.
The only person that brought a dinosaur with me, so I want to share.
Great. That might be a first for our boardroom.
More on her later. I'm a CalSTRS member and a high school biology and chemistry teacher in Sebastopol, California. I've taken this day out of my spring break to come and urge CalSTRS to divest my pension fund from fossil fuel companies. I'm here representing my local CTA union, the Twin Hills Teachers Association, as well as the Santa Rosa Teachers Association, who last year both passed resolutions urging CalSTRS to divest from fossil fuel companies. I also represent my many high school students who are deeply concerned about global warming and see the divestment movement as a powerful tool in getting fossil fuel companies to keep their reserves in the ground. I brought with me Fosse, the T-Rex skeleton that is a small piece of the 12-foot 3D skeleton that my students and I made. She says, "Keep me in the ground." My students also helped with our Fossil Fuels Equals History banner, which I guess is not here. I went into teaching 14 years ago because I wanted to have a positive effect on the world. I wanted to invest my time in helping create a better future. I'm now deeply concerned about the future we are creating for our children. Scientists are now preparing for a 4 degrees Celsius increase because that is the course we are currently on. Some predict we could reach the 4-degree mark by mid-century. When asked what the difference between a 2-degree and a 4-degree increase would be, Professor John Schellenhuber, one of the world's most influential climate scientists, said, "Human civilization." To keep us within the 2-degree limit, fossil fuel companies will have to keep 80% of their reserves in the ground. Hence, my students decided that Fosse would say, "Keep me in the ground." It pains me that my CalSTRS retirement fund invests in the very companies that are putting our world in peril. That in choosing to go into teaching and hence contributing to the CalSTRS divestment fund, I am unwittingly supporting fossil fuel companies and their destruction of our environment. The situation is too urgent to wait and hope that fossil fuel companies will respond to engagement. The time for divestment is now. Fortunately, many politicians, business leaders, and citizens are waking up to this stark reality and shifting to alternative energy. As a sign of the times, we passed a Nissan dealership on the way here. whose marquee message advertising their electric cars was, "Say goodbye to gas." As communities, local and state governments shift to alternative energy, investment in fossil fuel companies becomes more and more of a financial risk as well as an environmental risk. As I was sitting outside the meeting, two people came out just today, saw our sign and the dinosaur. One scoffed and said, "Do they want a retirement or not?" That is exactly why I am here. I want CalSTRS to divest from fossil fuel companies so that I have a financial and environmentally sound future to retire in. In 2 weeks, I will begin my biology teaching unit on climate change. Invariably, while teaching this unit, my students will stare back at me, flabbergasted, wanting to know what the adults in their lives are doing about this. I urge you to divest from fossil fuel companies today. I would like to go back to my students in 2 weeks and say, this is what we are doing about it. This is what one of the most powerful pension funds in the state is doing about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Galbraith. I believe Mr. Keeley has a question, actually, Ms. Galbraith. Do you want to just hang out for 1 second? Let me get you on there. Hang on. Oh, go ahead.
Hi, Ms. Galbraith.
Hi.
I'm sure you're a great teacher. I'm confident of that by your presentation and your passion. As a fellow
visual aids.
educator, there's just a natural inclination for that connection. So just how long have you been teaching?
14 years.
Okay, so in your biology teacher, so the 14 years that you've been teaching, the young people that are before you every day, have you noticed that there's a noticeable difference in terms of how they're looking at the world, what's important to them relative to the environment, and decisions that they'll be making as consumers of the future? What have you seen any change? Because I work in a school myself, and I have my own experience. I wonder what yours is.
Absolutely, I do. The students are more and more concerned and also more and more active. I actually work with students. I've been to rallies with students. The entire dinosaur has come to rallies. They work with me in painting signs. So they're not only concerned, but they're acting. And they're really looking at the adults in their community and wanting to know what we are doing and wanting to join us as adults themselves soon in actually taking action, not just being concerned and negative, but taking positive action.
Yeah. The reason I ask, I'm in a relatively liberal, left-leaning community in Santa Monica, and sometimes I wonder whether or not what I'm experiencing and seeing is a little bit of a bubble. And I know it is.
Oh, Santa Monica's a bubble, trust me.
I know it is, but I also really wonder whether or not there's some real grassroots traction that's taking place. And my sense is there's some generational stuff that's taking place.
Absolutely. And I work with students outside of my own school. I work with a number of other teachers in different Santa Rosa schools, and we are seeing this, and we are seeing a growing. And across, I work with a pretty diverse group of students, from religious backgrounds and non-religious backgrounds, and there is a real consensus and coming together of that generation of wanting to see change and wanting to see people actively doing things to make change, not just hoping somebody else will make the change.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Galbraith. Appreciate it. Jane, since you're up there, you want to go ahead and go next, since you're right there by the microphone? Jane Vosburg from Fossil Fuel California.
All roads in the 21st century lead to renewable energy sources. The fossil fuel industry will sputter to a stall before it freewheels to obsolescence. This is not just wishful thinking on my part or our part. The renewable energy revolution has begun, and there is no time like the present for CalSTRS to demonstrate that it will no longer contribute to the climate crisis, which is what we're doing right now. Members of the CalSTRS committee, we once again urge you to invoke your divestment policy and immediately freeze any new investments in fossil fuel companies, not just those of thermal coal, and divest completely by 2020. We hear the alarms from the financial heavyweights about the risks of investing in fossil fuel companies and the futility of engaging with them in the hope of changing their business model. The looming carbon bubble continues to grow and could burst at any moment, either with a big bang or a slow puncture. No matter which, share value in the fossil sector is going to plummet. And now a new warning from Carbon Tracker's financial analyst, Andrew Grant. He states that even without an international agreement on carbon emissions, the most carbon-intensive sectors of the economy are risky investments. He continues, the roof has fallen in on US coal, and alarm bells should be ringing for investors in related sectors around the world. These first tremors are amongst the clearest signs yet of a seismic shift in energy markets, as high carbon fuels are set to be increasingly outperformed by lower carbon alternatives. And what of the seismic shift in energy markets? According to Silicon Valley entrepreneur Tony Sieber, we are on the threshold of a market disruption caused by a solar energy tsunami. He predicts that by 2030, all energy will come from renewable sources, chiefly solar, and all cars will be electric, autonomous or semi-autonomous. And just for the record, Nissan plans to sell its first autonomous Leaf in 2019. Sieber describes the electric vehicle as a computer on wheels, which has the capacity to improve not only performance exponentially, but likewise its cost, against which conventional gas cars can't possibly compete. If he is only partially correct in his predictions, then we are on the cusp of a combined energy and technological revolution that will make fossil fuels irrelevant. To top this, Stanford Mark Jacobson has mapped out the states, showing how each state can become 100% renewable by 2050 if we had more political and societal will by 2030. Considering the likelihood of a clean energy market, I was floored to hear that Cal PERS is comfortable investing in a future that includes carbon capture and storage as proposed by coal companies. This is so 20th century thinking. Carbon capture and storage is far from proven technology. Worse still, this is the same argument that fossil fuel companies use when they try to convince us that their current business models will remain relevant. Why continue investing in a doomed industry whose operations are dooming the rest of us? The clean energy takeover is tangible. It is time to sever ties with the old friend, thank it for its past service, and put it out to those green pastures which it hasn't yet destroyed. A consultant response to a question from this committee at the last monthly meeting about sustainability and asset allocation was equally troubling. He said that to his knowledge, there was insufficient data on the subject. This belies the myriad data services that show how socially responsible portfolios have outperformed those that are not so responsible socially. As for it being a lot of work, of course, a portfolio of $198 billion requires a lot of hard work. And if any extra work will enable us to not only protect our portfolio, but also keep the global temperature from rising above 2 degrees Celsius, surely it'll be worth it. Members of the CalSTRS Investment Committee, we urge you respectfully to not wait for government intervention or international agreements from Paris this December before taking action to divest. These unprecedented times require strong leadership for which you are all qualified. The writing is on the wall. Silicon Valley will soon make oil, coal, and natural gas obsolete. Take immediate action, divest from all fossil fuels, and show the world that you truly care about safeguarding the future of our children and grandchildren as much as you care about safeguarding our portfolio. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Vosburg. Thank you for your comments. Anna Jacopetti, I'm saying that right? 350.org, Fossil Free Campaign. Welcome, Ms. Jacopetti. I hope I'm saying that right.
Hello.
Hello, welcome.
It's wonderful being in this beautiful building. I understand that it's energy efficient as well. I want to speak to you just very personally this morning. I want to speak to you as a mother of 6 children, combined families, of 13 grandchildren, the oldest, which is 14 right now, and someone who has taught I got my credential in can you believe this? I can't. 1964, my general secondary life credential. And since that time, I have taught every grade, 1st through 12th. I've taught junior college. I've taught teachers. I've supervised teachers. And I have been an administrator. So I come to you with all of these children in my heart today to speak about this very momentous time that we are all in. A time when it looks like we have to change course. How difficult that is when we don't know quite where we're going. It's much easier to go on with business as usual. But I find us at this moment. So I'm going to give you a big picture. I was thinking that the last day that I taught before I retired, I was with a very vibrant group of 8th graders, and I told them that the most important pillars for their future were sustainability, sociability too for them, sustainability, right, and social justice. That achieving these two very important, it's hard to know what to call them, goals, directions, would ensure their future. And that they should think about this as they went forward into high school and into college. They've all graduated college now and are about 22 years old, this group. So I looked at social justice and sustainability and our current economic system, which is based primarily on the availability of cheap energy, fossil fuels, extracted from the earth with greater and greater difficulty and peril all the time. And I saw that our current trajectory, this system, which has brought us so much, so much ease and development, unprecedented growth and comforts, is also not really so cheap, that the price for it is very heavy indeed. I'm looking at the cost in social justice, and we're seeing right now a widening of the wealth gap among people. I think that is the highest it's ever been since 1929 at the moment. We know what came after 1929. And I'm looking at the effect on the biosphere. This, of course, is chilling. I used my new Android phone, which I'm trying to get myself around. It's a difficult challenge for me. My grandchildren are helping me. But I spoke this morning and said, Google, would you tell me about extinction rates in the world today? And Google came back immediately, amazingly enough, and said that our biosphere is currently losing 150 to 200 species of plants, insects, birds, and mammals every 24 hours. We are in the midst right now of a mass extinction unprecedented since the time of the dinosaurs going extinct. Just ask this dinosaur back here, Sunny's dinosaur, what that was like when it happened. Our current path is obviously not sustainable and not socially just. So I'm asking you, as human beings like me, people who have children, grandchildren, land, places that they love, this is the time that we have to take a deep breath and begin to fight and ask for the kind of changes that are going to make help us to change our current trajectory toward catastrophe. As Sunny said, there is no retirement for anyone if our current path continues in the coming decades to become more and more catastrophic. So now is the time we need to make the change. If it goes too far, we're not going to be able to do that. So we can change now. I'm asking you to consider divesting from fossil fuels completely and setting the mark for the future, a more sustainable and socially just future for all of these children, the ones I think of past, present, and future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nice check up. Thank you for your service to the students, too. Ken Jones. We've got 2 more speakers. So Ken Jones from the CalSTRS retiree. Welcome, Mr. Jones.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. My name is Ken Jones, and I am a CalSTRS member, retired, living in Marin County, and receiving benefits. And thank you for those, but I am worried. I'm here because I want to talk about your investments in the energy sector, which is the worst performing sector in the S&P 500 by far over the last year, and which will be for at least another year, probably much more. And it is doing this poorly, even with one non-fossil fuel company in it, First Solar, which is doing exceptionally well. Most renewable sector companies fall in the technology sector, as you know. So aside from the moral issues, which are obvious from what fossil fuel companies are doing to the climate, the general health of the planet, the social justice issues related to which people's health is most impacted, and even California's water situation with toxic wastewater from fracking going into our aquifers. Investing in the extreme extraction energy sector, which is what I like to call it, simply is not sustainable from a fiduciary point of view. The value of these companies is completely unreal, as it is based on reserves that they will never be able to bring up. The resistance around the planet is way more intense than you likely hear on the news, and it is everywhere, building and relentless, from small communities to whole countries around the world. Your attempts at protest through constructive engagement is not going to get you close to where you need to be with a sector. They have no interest unless you show how serious you are by divesting from them. Despite this sector's poor performance and relatively easy ways through investing in a very broad market-based fossil-free indexes that decrease any extra risk, you have stayed with that sector. Parametric in Seattle has licensed from fossil fuel-free indexes, FFIUS, the S&P 500-like fossil-free index, which has outperformed the S&P 500 slightly going back 1, 3, 5, and 10 years, is one place you could look. Even investing in the renewable energy sector directly, a lot more, whose performance has clearly now separated from the energy sector as a whole and is doing very well in the last quarter, could have been a great decision. Instead, you have stayed with the extreme extraction companies that are sending bomb trains, as they are now called, into our cities, or just generally giving us the dirtiest energy ever for our children to enjoy as they watch civilization deteriorate. In actuality, civilization everywhere is already challenged. Even the problems in Syria was immediately preceded by the worst drought in ages that went on for years, causing mass movements of people into the cities. So what can you do to take advantage of the monumental investments that will need to be made in California alone in renewable energy? Well, Warren Buffett is probably the biggest private investor in the world in renewables, and he recently sold his whole position in ExxonMobil. He has positioned himself very well to take advantage of what will be happening in California. Why is that? You know, his first rule of investing, don't lose money. Second rule, don't ever forget the first rule. He owns a couple of utilities, one in Oregon, another in Nevada, with transmission lines that come into California. He knows we will not be able to create all of what we need here fast enough. He has so much cash looking for renewable energy, which the IEA says is the one place that is bound to grow exponentially. Perhaps, but maybe we should just let Mr. Buffett be himself and try not to think like him. But there are just too many signs that renewable energy is taking off. Community choice aggregation is going to be happening all over the state. Already is in Marin, where I live, in Sonoma County, but San Luis Obispo just came online. And there are at least 3 other places in the state that are about to, and that will increase dramatically the amount of renewable energy that these communities generate on their own and buy outside California and within. The Under the Dome video in China, you might have heard about, which was watched by more people in China than just about anything, that showed how much pollution is going on there and has put pressure on that government to do more solar than the United States in 1 year. The United States has in all of its time in 1 year. The success of indigenous groups in Canada regarding their treaty rights in Canadian courts to block fossil fuel environmental damage. So you could step ahead of the game. You are definitely behind right now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jones. And our last speaker, Bill Vosburg, 350. I'm assuming that's 350.org, right? I didn't see the .org part, but I'm assuming. Oh, and then Maggie from Sonoma. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm Bill Vosburg. I'm a retired teacher. I taught for 42 years in the secondary system and the junior college system. And as I said, I'm a retiree, and my paycheck arrived, my pension check arrived on Wednesday, so thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I hope it continues to arrive each month on the 1st, as always. I have a few words for you about engagement. And I want to remind you of the words of a few experts, Beavis Longstreth, former Vice President Al Gore, and also just want to reiterate the words that we've heard this morning about your experience with encouraging the gun manufacturers to divest. Engagement doesn't work when it asks a company to change its core business model. That's been the experience. It doesn't work. You ran into a brick wall when you asked gun companies to divest. I'm reminded this morning of the article in The Guardian that came out the last couple of days about the lengthy attempts by the Rockefeller families to engage with ExxonMobil to allow them to ask them to do, to change their business models. Over a period of 2004 to 2010, they had a variety of activities asking the directors at Exxon to alter what they were doing. Their requests were 3. 1, accept that climate change was real. 2, stop funding front groups that were providing propaganda which denied that climate change was real. And then 3, to begin to investigate alternative energy sources and move away from their core business plan. They were met with absolute zero success. In fact, the Exxon chief investor regulation said they were surprised that this family, which were the heirs of the founders of Exxon, were not part of their family that were sort of helping them and helping them shield off attempts to get them to stop their climate denial situation. These attempts to engage included lunch meetings with the head of the investor relations, friendly conversations, insider conversations, letters, shareholder meetings, shareholder resolutions, and attempts to change the chairman of the board. They were all met with zero positive results. So if the Rockefellers couldn't persuade Exxon to even accept that climate change was real, and to stop funding front groups that were denying the link between carbon and global warming, this shows how little chance engagement really has as a policy in affecting fossil fuels companies' core business models. The point was reinforced by former Vice President Mr. Gore last week. It doesn't work. They may show a little bit of willingness and go verbal agreement, but in the end, it doesn't happen. And it makes sense. Their business is extracting coal, oil, which they can sell. So I would say then, given that experience, it's time to add pressure to the divestment policy of engagement, if that's real, by beginning to take steps to divest. And with that attempt to divestment, perhaps the money will talk to the oil companies, to the fossil fuel companies, to the coal companies. But until there's serious attempts, which includes financial consequences to the companies, they won't be doing more than giving lip service. And beyond, as the other speakers have said, it's the moral thing to do, it's the right thing to do to say for our children. Answering Mr. Kelly's question a little while ago, I spoke at Sonoma State to a group of students, juniors there, and I explained some of the facts about divestment. About divestment. I'm on a one-track mind and a little bit nervous. Funny, you speak for 30 years in front of kids, and it's a little entirely different when there's a bunch of adults in suits and a microphone. I should probably stand over. Now listen, children, this is what I want to hear you say.
Absolutely. I can relate to that.
They actually, when I presented the facts that perhaps we have until 2029, perhaps 2032, when we reach the 2 degrees Celsius mark, when the tipping point then happens, that perhaps then the climate catastrophe is real. That Florida, perhaps half of Florida could be toast if we don't change, that Manhattan will need to have brick walls around it to keep out the sea changes and so on if we go between 2 degrees and 4 degrees and so on. And I mentioned I'm old. I'm going to be probably dead by then. But you will be here, and you'll be having children, and your children will be. And their eyes poked up. It became real to them. And they said, what's been going on? What are the adults doing? What can we do? And I said to them, well, one of the things I've been doing with my retirement is, now that I have some time, is to help convince the adults who are in charge, the adults who are in charge of the money that's helping fund these things, to make some changes. I said, you need to do the same. Get a club going on the campus, talk to your professors, get them to divest their pensions, and so on. But you need to educate yourselves more about the facts and then also do what you can do. So I would ask you, in the name of the students, the names of the children and grandchildren, to divest, because it makes good moral sense, but also excellent and very good financial sense. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Vosburg. Maggie?
Good morning, Maggie Ellis, Chair of CTA Retirement Committee. It's been a busy few days with discussion about divestment, and I don't know if the board is aware that on a very regular basis, Chris comes down to our CTA State Council and educates our members about divestment. Often we are presented with requests to divest from different things, going clear back to tobacco. And our committee hears that with the education that Chris has provided us and the history going back to South Africa and all the different divestments that have occurred by CalSTRS over the years. Through that education, I believe that our state council will support you in any decision that you make with regards to your divestment policy. I had a great conversation with Chris yesterday after our firearms discussion and learned a great deal about how this policy came into play, how when we divested from tobacco, what the steps took, and we didn't even have a real formal divestment policy at that time. History is critical in understanding how you as a board have to uphold your fiduciary responsibilities and abide within the law. Understanding the difference between a limited partnership and a general partner and the constraints that that puts you under. Education of our members and you as a board and the public is a critical part of this. So I'm going to thank Chris because your board item gives me more to take back to my state council next week, and we'll do some more education because these items will be coming up, whether it was firearms or if it's this divestment of coal or if it's the issue around Turkey. So as the chair, we support this board continuing to have the conversation and do your due diligence with your divestment policy. That's why it's in play. You have brought key speakers to speak to you on sustainability. The presentation by Al Gore was incredibly insightful. I think we all have differences of opinion about engagement and whether it works or not. I would like to see CalSTRS do a little bit more about how you are engaging with other organizations, whether it's Ceres or the UN or other energy projects, so that people understand what it is that you are doing. It's not about just fossil fuels, but about moving towards green energy. I don't think we've highlighted you and the work that you've done enough, and that would be my request from the board. So I look forward to the outcome of your continued conversation on divestment and fossil fuels and the engagement of all those different areas when we talk about fuel and energy for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. I have a couple comments, and then I want to move us forward. I want to thank. I know I'm also an active teacher that takes time out to sit on this board, so I recognize the cost, and especially spring break is your time to re-energize from all the work you do. So I really appreciate the active teachers in the room taking the time to be here and share your voice, and then the retirees in the room. You know, this is why we do this work, is to make sure that teachers in California, active and retired, can have a secure retirement. And I appreciate the feedback, and I do know as a board we have been intentionally looking at sustainability and our board's asking a lot of challenging questions, and some of those questions will continue to come up in open session. So you will see that we really are trying to look at how do we hold true to our fiduciary duty of making money for our fund, mitigating risk, but consider the kinds of issues that you're bringing forward to us. So I really appreciate hearing a teacher's voice. So thank you for that, and thank you for the sacrifice of your time. I did want to just sort of bring us back to that this is an action item, and again, to clarify, today the action item is to initiate our policy, our divestment policy on thermal coal. I know there were other conversations today around fossil fuels more broadly. I just wanted to make sure the investment committee was clear on the action today is to, whether we choose or not, to ask staff to initiate our divestment policy around thermal coal, to start this process that Chris explained. And are there any other? Oh, Harry? Let me just get you. Go ahead.
I have a general question. It could be for staff who's present at the front, or maybe anybody in the back. In a really general, broad way, how are we collaborating with other large institutional investors on this specific issue? If we take some action here that's going to have some impact, but clearly this whole issue of thermal coal is a global matter. And I don't necessarily need specifics, but if you could give the board a little bit of an overview, Ms. Sheehan. Thanks. Thank you, Ann. And Brian, Mr. Rice?
Yeah, so I'm pulling up Brian and Ann from Corporate Governance Unit because we have obviously Ceres, which Jack is on the board, INCR, UNPRI, quite a few different organizations. As it relates specifically to coal, it's mostly just been us and PERS. There are universities. Stanford's the only one, but they just sold. They didn't do anything more that I'm aware of. So it's just been us and PERS that have talked about engagement to this point. PERS is under their own time track, and I think they don't have a divestment policy that I'm aware of, so they'll just follow the legislation.
Thanks. Good morning. Anna Sheehan, Director of Corporate Governance. We are talking to other funds. I actually just came back from CII and spent a lot of time with the representative from Norges Bank, the Council of Institutional Investors, and just spent time with Norges Bank and some of the European funds who are doing a little bit more on this. And I know you guys on your trip talk to some of the European funds on that. Chris is right. The American funds, some of the pension funds at CII are a little bit behind us. They're sort of watching what's going on. But there is a lot of education going on through various groups, and I'll have Brian talk a little bit about what series and some of the specific things that they are doing. But we are spending time talking to others about how they are addressing this issue, and also talking to some of the other traditional investment managers, how they're dealing with climate or environmental issues, and that would include BlackRock, State Street, and others, about how they look at some of these issues.
Good morning, Brian Rice, Portfolio Manager, Corporate Governance. Specific to carbon asset risk and collaborative engagement, Ceres was brought up, and so we are working through Ceres and the Investor Network on Climate Risk, the INCR, to engage fossil fuel companies on how they are, the conversation is largely on how are they considering further capital expenditures on fossil fuel exploration and production. And so we're working collaboratively with endowments, foundations, faith-based groups, and other pension funds. The pension funds are CalPERS, CalSTRS, New York City, New York State, and Connecticut, which are largely the pension funds that get involved on the environmental issues collaboratively.
Thanks for that. It's my sense that there's a belief, and don't take this statement other than for what it says, and my sense is that there's a belief amongst other large global institutional investors that believe if there was heightened collaboration amongst large institutional investors in the area of engagement around this issue, as well as a more global environmental risk issues that Mr. Rice represents us on, that approach could actually have more meaningful and substantive change than the approach of funds taking this route individually at different times. It's more of probably a conversation over a cup of coffee, but it seems to be a sentiment of people who have a lot of experience, more than I do, that I'm kind of thinking about. So,
Harry, I would just add, you're hitting a point which is, and I understand the point of divestment, they're hoping to create a wave, but if we divest, then we quit these groups. There's no point in being involved in them. So the effective divestment is to silence us on this issue. If people want us to make change, we have to have some ownership. If we don't have ownership, then we just quit and we'll get involved in other projects. But we would obviously not need to maintain our membership in these organizations and leave it to the rest of the world. That's part of the challenge. Engagement is hard, but and I understand the divestment group has other views about how that would be a different momentum, but that's part of the challenge as we face it, because your fiduciary is just here. But we met with even the UK EPA Association, and it's very clear in Europe they do not believe in divestment at all. They believe you have to be in the game and be active. And I know we have debates about active management, but they believe you have to be active.
Yeah, and my final point, it's not so much of a question, but an observation. There seems also to be a little bit of a vacuum and perhaps an opportunity for leaders at pension funds that are non-executive, non-staff leaders who are interested in policy making to collaborate as well from a policy making perspective, and that is to say, what are different large institutional funds thinking about from a policy perspective, from a risk perspective? How are the policymakers thinking about this issue, and what can we do together collectively to maybe, there's power in numbers. So that's another pot of coffee. So we'll have to have lunch, I think, Ann.
I think that we're good.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Brian.
So with that, I'd like to move the recommendation, a PCA's recommendation that the investment committee directs staff and our consultants to evaluate the risk of investments in thermal coal companies under the 21 risk factors.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? You are so directed. Thank you, Chris. I'm going to ask, it's 11:45, and I wanted to see if we could get into, Chris, your CIO report before lunch. Is that okay with the board if we do that? And then we'll break for lunch after item 8, the CIO report. Does that sound?
That's good. They're planning you at 12:30.
Oh, okay, well, we'll just, how about, we'll just see, we'll go up to 12:30. So lunch at 12:30.
And I'll try to be real quick so we can get into asset allocation. Alan, can you hand me the slide real quick?
Oh, whoops, you know what? I'm sorry.
Conferring
with my vice chair. Sorry. That's why we're a team, and that's why we're a good team. We actually were going to jump into asset allocation. I apologize. I don't know why I got stuck on that number, but we are going to jump into item 10, partially because we have some board members that need to leave early, and so we want to make sure that we attend to asset allocation. So I apologize, Chris, for that.